Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're looking into the process of legally buying a gun in Mexico. It's based on some recent reporting.
Yeah, and it's kind of fascinating because the Mexican Constitution does mention the right to own firearms.
Right, but the reality of actually doing that, it seems quite different from what you might expect, especially compared to, say, the U.S. situation.
Exactly. It's a strange paradox, isn't it? You have this constitutional right on the books, but exercising it faces some, let's say, significant hurdles.
Significant is maybe an understatement. I mean, the entire country, Mexico, has only 2 legal gun stores.
Two. In the whole country.
And get this, they're both located on military bases.
Yeah, not exactly your local corner shop.
No kidding. So you have to go onto a military installation just to potentially buy a firearm legally. That alone tells you something, doesn't it?
It really does. It signals a very specific level of government control right from the outset. It's not integrated into everyday civilian life at all.
And this whole topic, it's got wider relevance too, right? There are these ongoing legal discussions involving U.S. gun manufacturers in Mexico.
That's true. There's international interest in how Mexico handles gun laws, definitely.
So our mission today really is to dig into the practical side. What does it actually take for an average citizen in Mexico to legally get a gun? And what does this super controlled system mean, especially when, illegal guns seem to be a separate huge issue?
Absolutely. Let's unpack it.
Okay, so let's start with that access issue. 2 stores on military basis. That's just worlds apart from the U.S. system.
Yeah.
What kind of problems does that create immediately?
Well, the biggest one is logistics, right?
Yeah.
Just getting there. Imagine you live nowhere near Mexico City where one of them is.
Right.
There's this account of a municipal police officer from Colima. It's a state with significant violence problems.
Okay.
He and some colleagues literally had to drive 8 hours in a van just to reach one of these stores.
8 hours just to get there. That's a huge commitment.
Massive. Time, resources, before you even start the paperwork.
And the description of the places themselves.
Yeah.
Someone called it a cross between a DMV office and a small museum.
Yeah. Sounds very bureaucratic, maybe a bit sterile. Not exactly welcoming.
Doesn't sound like a place encouraging casual shopping? No. So you make the trip, you get to this quasi-DMV on a military base. Then what?
Then comes the application process. And this isn't quick. You're talking about getting approval before you can even buy anything. And that can take months.
Months, just for the pre-approval.
Months. It's a really extensive bureaucratic process.
Wow. Okay, what kind of paperwork are we talking about?
It's a lot. Reports mention nearly a dozen different documents.
A dozen. Like what?
Okay, so you need a specific gun acquisition form, naturally. Proof you have no federal criminal record.
Makes sense.
Then comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations.
Whoa, psych evils.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, a drug test. Proof of where you live, proof of employment, copies of your ID, your birth certificate, your tax number.
Good grief.
And if you're maybe a sport shooter, you might need proof of membership in a shooting club.
Okay. And I assume there's a fee for all this.
There is an additional fee, about $25 on top of everything else.
So the time, the travel, the sheer volume of paperwork, the medical checks, it's clearly designed to be difficult.
Absolutely. The medical, the psych eval, the drug test, it points to wanting only a very specific type of person to get through legally. It's about caution control.
So let's look at someone who actually went through it, that police officer from Colima you mentioned. Why did he need a gun personally?
His reasoning was direct family safety. Because of his job, the risks involved, he wasn't allowed to take a service weapon home.
Ah, okay. So this was for personal protection at home.
Exactly. And for him, it took 3 months just to get the approval.
3 months waiting.
And then the cost of the handgun itself was $518.
$518. How does that compare to, like, average earnings?
Well, reports suggest that the average monthly salary in Mexico is around $320. So you're looking at significantly more than a month's pay for many people.
Wow. That puts it out of reach for a lot of folks, even if they manage the paperwork and the travel. It really highlights the gap between a right on paper and, well, being able to actually use it.
Precisely. Especially for someone whose job puts them at risk.
There was another perspective mentioned too, right? A sport shooter.
Yeah, a guy named Eduardo Ignacio Garcia Zavala. He went to the Mexico City store for a precision rifle.
Okay.
And his take was interesting. He appreciated buying it legally, the peace of mind that came with it, even though he knew the selection was limited and the cost was higher than in the U.S.
Did he compare it to the illegal market?
He did. He mentioned that same rifle would cost maybe 4 times more on the black market.
4 times.
Yeah.
So Okay, there's actually a financial incentive not to go the illegal route if you can manage the legal one.
For certain items, it seems so. But he also talked about, feeling satisfied buying legally, but still being very aware, even fearful, of encountering illegally armed people on the street.
Hmm. So he's playing by the very strict rules, but the danger from those outside the rules is still very real.
It captures the complexity, doesn't it?
It really does. So what's the official thinking? Why make it so incredibly difficult?
Well, there's a quote from a colonel involved in the approvals, Jesus Alfonso Nava Bustamante. He basically said the goal is to maintain control.
Maintain control.
Yeah, and the worry was that otherwise anyone would be armed.
So it's an explicit strategy to limit ownership because of a fear of widespread armament in the general population.
That seems to be the core rationale, yes. The whole process is built to restrict access.
Okay, but here's the part that's hard to reconcile. You have these incredibly strict legal controls. Yet Mexico's homicide rate is, well, significantly higher than in the U.S., where legal access is much easier.
That's the critical disconnect, isn't it?
How does that work?
It points strongly to the fact that legal controls don't automatically solve gun violence when there's a thriving illegal market.
Right. Where are the illegal guns coming from then?
Various channels. Trafficking, particularly from the U.S., is a major factor often cited, but also corruption, weapons diverted from official sources, and black markets supplied from Central and South America, too.
So the cartels, the criminals, they aren't going through this months-long bureaucratic process anyway.
Highly unlikely. They have their own supply chains completely outside this legal system.
Which means these strict laws mostly end up impacting...
Law-abiding citizens, the ones trying to follow the rules.
So the consequences for them are pretty stark.
Yeah.
Huge costs, really long waits, having to travel maybe hundreds of miles.
Exactly. And there was another revealing comment attributed to a former official.
What was that?
Something like, it's good that it doesn't look good to own a gun.
Suggesting it's deliberate policy to discourage even wanting one for self-defense? Making it socially awkward almost.
It leans that way, yeah. A kind of discouragement of self-defense for the average person.
Which leads to the uncomfortable question. Do these controls, by making legal self-defense so hard, actually leave ordinary citizens more vulnerable to criminals who are heavily armed?
That's the argument many would make. If a legal path is practically impossible for most, it effectively disarms the potential victims, not the perpetrators.
Okay, so just to sort of wrap this up, what we've seen is this system in Mexico with immense hurdles for legal gun ownership. Very few stores, tons of paperwork, long waits, high costs.
Right, and the government's rationale is clear. Maintain control, limit access.
But the tough reality is, this doesn't seem to be stopping criminals from getting guns or reducing the overall violence because the illegal market is just operating on a whole different level.
Precisely. The legal restrictions seem largely disconnected from the realities of crime.
So it leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question to think about. When it's this difficult for law-abiding people in Mexico to legally get a firearm, what does that really mean for their personal safety? And what does it say about the relationship between the government and its citizens when it comes to, well, the basic idea of protecting yourself?
It definitely makes you reflect on different approaches to gun control around the world and how complex the outcomes often are, regardless of the intentions. Something to mull over.